Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us today on the show, the esteemed Michael Fremer. You are listening to the Occasional Podcast, Season 7, Episode 9. We're actually Episode 9. And Michael Fremer of the Absolute Sound, originally, I believe, was one of his first foyers. Then Stereophile, of course, we know a lot of people know him from that. And now he's on to a couple other ventures that he's going to talk about himself. Michael, thanks for joining us on the show. How are you today?
Sure, I'm doing great today, actually. So, aside from I started out at the Absolute Sound, and then I went to Stereophile. And while I was at Stereophile, I did two things. I started a website called TrackingAngle.com, and I also started a print magazine called the TrackingAngle. And that was in print for 4 years, and it started doing pretty well. It was a full-color glossy magazine. It was actually quite nice. And the fifth year we stopped because even though we had like 14,000 subscribers, which was okay given the size of it, given that we started with nothing, the whole music business said after 4 years of not supporting us because they didn't want to support. Why did we need to support a magazine that was promoting physical media, especially vinyl records, which were going away? Then by the fifth year, they said they would support us and they would advertise and we would be able to survive because we put money in. We didn't take any money out after we did it for 4 years without making any money. And then all of a sudden, the big record business consolidation happened. And so all the people we were talking to at A&M and Island, all these record labels, they just disappeared. And it got swallowed up by, UME and other companies and Sony BMG. So we stopped it. So that's while I was writing for Stereophile. And then I started TrackingAngle.com. And then at Stereophile, I felt I needed to do something in addition. So I had TrackingAngle.com up and running, and that was doing pretty well. And I said to the people at Stereophile, I need to make more money because I was a freelancer, And so I said, I'm going to write for other magazines. I said, I won't review hi-fi equipment because that's exclusively at Stereophile, but I'll do factory tours, I'll do interviews, I'll do color things just to make some extra money. So they didn't like that. And they said, this is going to dilute your brand. And I said, I don't see that, but maybe so, but it will concentrate my bank account. So it's a trade-off I'm willing to make. And then they came back and said that they made an offer to me, look, we'll buy your website, we'll build you a new one, and you'll become a company employee, which I'd never been in my whole life, a company employee. So I agreed to that. My accountant said the problem with that is that your tax benefits are not quite as good because you can't write everything off. When I was freelancer, I could write everything off. But it seemed to me like a good deal about 11 years ago. And so I did that. So they bought TrackingAngle and started a new website for me, which I named and I developed and I built. And they just gave me a platform to do it. And that was Analog Planet. And Analog Planet was a very successful website. And I started the Analog Planet YouTube channel, which wasn't part of the deal. I just did it because I wanted to do it. I had the Analog Planet radio show on WFDU. And I did that because I wanted to do it. It wasn't like I was being paid for it. And so the Analog Planet YouTube channel eventually had 52,000 subscribers, which is a good number. And the videos are very, very popular. And then I decided I wanted to go out on my own again for various reasons that I don't necessarily want to go into. Other than to say I just started feeling my fit at Stereophile was not as good as it was at the beginning. I felt the magazine was changing directions and it wasn't in the direction where I was going. And, Analog Planet reviewed mostly inexpensive gear. I looked at the numbers. I saw what was drawing traffic, and it wasn't $100,000 turntables, which I never reviewed on Analog Planet, despite some nasty comments once I left. When you leave a publication like that, when you leave a website like that, and a magazine you've been at for 30 years, and you kind of go away, it's almost like you die, and you stay alive to see your own obituary. That's what it's like. So that's what it was like. And I don't go back to they never said, Michael is doing TrackingAngle.com and good luck. They just said he's moved on to other endeavors. So I say my previous endeavor, I don't mention what it was. It's silly, but that's what it is. I go back there occasionally, and most of the people are sad to see me go, but a couple of people that didn't really like me would post nasty stuff, and that's fine. If you don't make enemies, you don't really have good friends. That's what I think. So, someone said, well, good. I'm glad he's gone because I don't want to read about $100,000 turntables. Well, I never wrote about $100,000 turntables on Analog Planet. So that's a person that really never read Analog Planet. That's a person who just wanted to get his rocks off by attacking me. But that's fine. Anyway, so I have TrackingAngle.com. It's being built right now. And it's the name of the magazine I used to publish, and the people that are building it for me and I'm in partnership with are my old partners at the Tracking Angle magazine. So that's really a nice thing. And then at the same time, I met with the people from the Absolute Sound just to see what they would say if they wanted to have me join them. And they did. And they made me a very attractive offer, and I took it. And it's a sharing kind of thing. So I'm going to do videos on Tracking Angle and share it with the Absolute Sound. And I'm going to do a series of videos for the for the Absolute Sound exclusively, and they probably will let me share it on my. It's a sharing thing because I have a brand that's built and established, and it's in everybody's benefit for us all to share. And they have obviously an established brand with the Absolute Sound. So the deal I made with them is a really positive thing for me. I feel really good about it. Both I feel secure financially, and I feel emotionally wanted and secure. So it's very, very good. So the YouTube channel is up. It just went up. And I've gone from 52,000 subscribers to 300 and something subscribers. But that's to be expected. It's going to take time to build it back up again. I think the people that were subscribing to Analog Planet YouTube channel will find me eventually, and I'll build it back up to where it was. So.
Now, do you kind of, at least in your mind, see a place where you retire and stop doing this? Or is this something that you could feel like, man, I'm going to keep doing this as long as I'm physically capable?
You mean just because I'm 75 years old, which I am? No, I don't feel like 75 years old. And so, no, I'm not ready to retire. I think, realistically speaking, I'll go to 80 if I can. It's funny because I got invited by a fan to Abu Dhabi for the Formula One race in December. That was really kind of cool because the guy doesn't even have a turntable, but he just was a fan. So he invited me, and I flew on his private. Well, it was a chartered Gulfstream plane with a few other people, and he was flying his lawyer over to Abu Dhabi, and he said, "Why don't you just hop a ride with the planes there? Come on over." So I did. I went to the Formula One. I was well taken care of. It was a lot of fun. But his lawyer is 82. Marty Edelman. Marty's 82 years old, and he's man, this guy is rocking. He is rocking and rolling. And I said to myself, if I could be like Marty when I'm 82, I'll keep doing this. Why not? Mm-hmm. Now, in all honesty, I do not claim that my hearing is what it was when I was 40 years old. It's not, and no doubt. But I find as long as what I write and what I review, and I'm very specific in my reviews. I don't write these fluff reviews where everything's great, or I try to describe how things really sound. And when it gets to the point where people start saying, you know what, that doesn't sound like that at all, then maybe I'll consider retiring. But for now, I'm finding the feedback I get from readers, young readers especially, about what I hear in cartridges and turntables and loudspeakers is corroborated by younger ears. So, and I have a lot of young fans, and I really enjoy having young fans and young readers. It keeps you young. So as long as I feel like I am reporting accurately and I don't look too bad, I'll keep doing it.
Tell me a little bit, like, maybe, I don't know if you've done this too many times, but I would love to know how you first got into all of this. Did you do something before you reviewed audio gear? What was it, and what got you into this?
So I'm one of those people that was always into music, that was the most important thing in my life was music, listening to music, records, having a turntable since I was a little boy. And so I was always involved in it. And then I got to college. I was a disc jockey on the radio in college.
Mm-hmm.
I got thrown off of the radio. That's a whole nother story. It'll be in my book. I got fired from our college radio station. This doesn't happen to too many people. And then I went to Boston to go to law school, and I got a job in a local record store, of course, because I wanted to get a discount on my records. And so I hung out at the record store at night in Harvard Square, and I sold records. And there was a hi-fi store upstairs. But I always had a good hi-fi. I was always even in college. I built Dynakits. I was just one of those people who's like everybody else who's an audiophile now. At some point, they were that. They were in college or in high school, and they were, hanging out with audiophiles and getting stereo equipment. So I was one of those people. And then the ad salesperson for WBCN, which was the hip radio station in Boston, came in to sell advertising to the record store. And the guy that owned the record store said, "Look, I don't have an ad agency. I don't know how I'm going to produce commercials for you." And they said, "Well, we'll do the commercials for you and we'll run them." And I said, "Man, their commercials suck. Terrible commercials." Because this is a hippie radio station and they're not interested in advertising. So the ads would be like, "There's a record store in Harvard Square, and it's Minutemen Records, and they've got records to sell, and this week they've got some $3 specials." I said, "Let me do your commercials. I'll make funny ones." So I started making funny radio commercials, and they became a hit. And people would call up the station and request the radio commercials as opposed to songs. That really happened. And so at some point they said to me, "You should try out to be on the air here. You got a following for your radio commercials." So I did. And I got on the air. And I did a 2-week summer thing and got on the air. I built a fan base, and it was going really well. And then I got fired from that also. Because as my friend Steve Berkowitz is the guy that's in charge of the Dylan catalog and the Miles Davis catalog for Sony BMG. He was in Boston at that time, and he was the record buyer for this record store chain that I ended up doing commercials for. He said, "You were inventing Howard Stern before there was Howard Stern. So I'll accept that if you said that." So I got fired. That's another story about that I could tell you, but I don't want to get into that now. But that's what I was doing. And I got back on the radio there doing short little, funny audio cartoons. All that time I was doing commercials for record stores, for hi-fi stores, and, collecting records and writing some pieces for the Boston Phoenix and the Real Paper, which were the two alternative newspapers. So that's what I was doing. And then I got hired to work on an animated film called Animal Olympics. And that was done for NBC for the Winter and Summer Olympics in 1980. And it was also put together as a feature film for overseas use. They moved to California, and I moved with them. So I ended up naming all the characters, and the storyboard was partly done, and I filled in all the dialogue for the storyboards. I was involved in hiring Harry Shearer to do voices. So the voices in the movie were Gilda Radner, Billy Crystal, Harry Shearer, and me. And now they've all drifted off into obscurity, and I'm a big star. So that's what happens.
Oh, so you actually did VO work on the film too? Absolutely,
and it's on Amazon Prime now, and you can watch it. It's got a really strong fan base. It's also been on YouTube. You go on YouTube, you can find it also, and it's got this fan base of people from all way back in 1980 who are still fans of it, and the comments are great. They go, "I grew up with this film, and now I have my own children, and I make them watch it," and it's funny, and I wrote most of the jokes that are in it, and the jokes are kind of like the jokes you'd see in Bullwinkle. So there are jokes that kids would get, and if they didn't get it, it didn't matter, but the adults would get it. All kinds of funny stuff is in that movie. And so, I play Henry Kissinger as the anchor turtle. I play the male and female leads in the movie, both male. So I was way ahead of my time. And I played all kinds of I named all the characters in the movie. I was responsible for hiring Graham Gouldman of 10cc to write the music. And the lead animator wrote The Lion King, and one of the other animators is Brad Bird, who you probably know, Iron Giant, and he's become absolutely famously successful. Brad Bird, all kinds of people came out of that movie, so I'm very proud of that movie. And I got fan mail from that. I got a guy sent me a letter. He said, my daughter Emma is 4 years old, and she watches Animal Olympics on Amazon, and she loves it, and she loves the characters that you played, and she wanted me to get in touch with you and get your autograph. You know how great that is. Yeah. For a 4-year-old is a fan of something I did in 1980. It's incredible. So I have these Animal Olympics stick-a-tune things that came out when the movie came out. So I have 4 of them, like sealed in plastic, and they're little cartoon characters that you stick on refrigerators and stuff. So I said to myself, what would be better than me sending it to this little girl? So I sent her one of the stick-a-tune things. I can't tell you how great that is. So then from that, the director of that movie directed the first Tron. So I got hired to supervise the soundtrack to the first Tron movie, which ended up getting nominated for an Academy Award for Best Soundtrack. So, yeah, those are all cool things that I've done.
So there's a lot. You've worked on a lot of mediums. You've worked in the radio medium. You've worked in movies and television.
Yep.
And you've worked with the written word. Is there something specific about working with the written word that draws you to it more than the others? Is it all fun? What draws you to the things that you choose to do and have done over your career?
I also did stand-up comedy for about 10 years. And I opened for bands. I opened for television. I opened for The Jam. I opened for Root Boy Slim and the Sex Change Band. So, I played at Max's Kansas City. I'm probably the only comedian that ever played at Max's Kansas City. And that was great. They loved it. They loved what I did. But I ended up writing because while I was in Los Angeles, when Tron ended, I couldn't get any more film work because usually the tech side, which is the sound effects, sound management, is you go along with the director. That's who hires you. And since Tron was not a financial success, it was way ahead of its time in some ways. The script had flaws in it. It didn't. It came out at the same time as E.T. You watch E.T. and I don't care how old you were when that came out. You cry at the end when I'm going home. Steven Spielberg knew how to tug on the heartstrings, and you cried. And Tron was a much drier, cooler. It didn't have any of that kind of emotional thing, so it wasn't successful, and so that ended my film career essentially. And so I started writing for a magazine called Optic Music because the whole video thing was happening with video music things, and I was writing for a magazine called Music Connection in Los Angeles that a friend of mine, Bud Scapa, was the editor of. So I was writing, and then I was also reading The Absolute Sound. I was a big fan of that. And Harry Pearson, who was the editor, put out a call for a pop music editor. He wanted to hire a pop music editor. So I sent him some articles I had written about digital audio in the Music Connection magazine. And basically what I was writing was feeding back to Harry Pearson what I read that he wrote. So of course he loved it because it was like looking in the mirror. And he hired me to... And I also had a radio commercial business going at the same time. I kept making radio commercials for record stores and hi-fi stores and a video chain. But what was interesting about the video chain is that they had stores all over the country, and they built me a recording studio in their suite, which was Johnny Carson's old office on Sunset Strip. And I would finish a commercial, and then all I had to do was change the tag. Video Biz in Wheeling, West Virginia. Video Biz in Searcy, Alabama, in Searcy, Arkansas, because the stores are all in these small rural towns where they didn't have any other way to watch. There was not satellite television at that point in time.
Right.
And for some reason, whatever it is that I have, these commercials got a following also, and they would fly me into Searcy, Arkansas. And they would fly me into Morgantown, West Virginia, and to make personal appearances because these radio commercials attracted a following. I mean, it was like nuts. But that's what was happening. So I went to Searcy, Arkansas, and made personal appearance. I was a big hit in Gadsden and Anniston, Alabama, which is where that's where the Marine Depot is. And they were digging these crazy commercials that I was making, which were very funny and somewhat salacious and pushed the envelope, which was what I always did. But so.
Is there anything lost in the old school radio that we don't see now with the new generation of children and this TikTok and the video flying by? Do you think there's anything really lost, or is it just in your mind entertainment shifting positions?
Well, everything's shifting positions. So you could say that magazines are in big trouble, which they are. People don't want to read so much anymore. They'd rather watch videos. And it's funny because that's what, the website is great like that. The magazines are still surviving because some people do like to have a coffee table experience, but you've got to make it look good. If you're going to keep selling a magazine and people are going to pay for the print medium, you've got to make it attractive. And the websites are good, but I like to write record reviews because if I take my time to write something, it can be a lot more eloquent than just off the top of your head. But Rick Rubin gave me some advice once, and I didn't take it, which is really stupid because if Rick Rubin gives you advice and you don't take it, you're being stupid. And his advice to me was, you're good on camera, why don't you just do video reviews of records? Hold the record up and talk about it. So I did some of that, but not a lot. I would hold up records and talk about sound. I mean, I was one of the first people to do that. Now any yokel can hold up a record and put his face on the camera and talk about records, But I was one of the first people to do that. But I'm going to do more of that now, especially because my new website isn't going to be up till the end of July probably. So. And I don't want to lose the thread of record reviews, so I'm going to turn the camera on and hold up records and review them, and hopefully I'll be halfway eloquent in the process.
See, actually, I have run into Rick Rubin. He still comes out, or he used to come out to CES.
Yeah.
And he would be like walking through the halls, and I saw this guy run by one time, and I was in the middle of a conversation, and he had quite disheveled hair, and he was wearing shorts. And someone was like, that was Rick Rubin that just ran by. His appearance now, you see him more in the videos and interviews now, but I was surprised by him, and he's a really cool guy. I like it that he represents, because there's a lot of musicians out there. Same year, though, Kanye came out. Well,
Rick's an audio enthusiast. He's got a good system at home, hates records, so he always makes fun of me with records. He always sends me, emails of... negative things about records, and they're always funny. And if you can't laugh at it, then you got a big problem. He did an appearance on Saturday Night Live, and he asked me to help him get a turntable so he could make fun of records on Saturday Night Live, which he did. And of course, Howard Stern makes fun of Baba Booey for his records, and I was on the Howard Stern show. I was on the Howard Stern show in 2001, and I was on there because Stereophile had a hi-fi show in New York. And so the publicist was able to get me on the Howard Stern show to talk about high-definition television, which was just getting started in 2001. And that was in June of 2001 is when they finally got the antennas on top of the World Trade Center that could broadcast high-definition television. So I was on there talking about that. And I also said, Howard, I want to say right now, I'm making a big prediction that vinyl is going to make a huge comeback. And he said, vinyl, I hated vinyl. I was a disc jockey. I hated having to play records and cue up the records, and I hated it. And I said, I was a disc jockey too in the 70s in Boston, and I loved back cueing a record and getting two turntables set up. That was the skill. That was the fun of it. Just pushing a button. And then his friend Vinny called up. I don't know how much you listen to Howard Stern, but his friend Vinny called up, and Vinny said, this guy's crazy. The future is MP3s. And I said, Vinny, MP3s are not the future. MP3s sound terrible. I said, records are the best way to listen to music. I said, I'll sit you down in front of a good stereo. I'll play you a record, and I'll blow your mind. And that's what I learned. Never use the word blow on the Howard Stern show. So... And then I became friends with Vinny and his wife Debbie, and we talk all the time, and he's a great guy. And of course, vinyl made a big comeback, and Baba Booey Gary Delabate is a big vinyl fan, and Gary had a TV show on a VH1 channel called For What It's Worth, and he came over to my place and shot video here. And it's you can probably find it on the internet someplace. And that was fun. I've had all these cool adventures with all these people. So,
on the subject of vinyl, I think I'm going to ask you a two-part question here, and I feel like we already know the answer to the first one. But compared to its digital counterparts, does vinyl always sound better? And I think we know the answer to that from your perspective, but I'll let you answer it. But the real...
No, you don't. It doesn't. No, it doesn't always sound better. Come on, it can't always sound better.
Okay, the real question I want to ask you is, from your long experience with this, what do you, in the occasions where vinyl does sound better, what do you attribute it to most often? Obviously, every experience, every recording from the mic to whatever is different. But for generalities, what do you attribute the change in sound from?
This is interesting because it's something, first of all, in the early days of CDs, it wasn't even close. The first generation of CD reissues of things that came out on vinyl that were recorded to tape, they were terrible. It wasn't even like, oh, it's not quite as good. It was a big step down. I mean, a huge, huge step down. And yet people insisted on saying it was better. I'd read these CD Review magazine came out. So there was a magazine called CD Review, and this guy was all gung-ho. I got the reissue of so-and-so on the CD. Now it sounds great. And I would send that guy emails or faxes at that time. I'd say, it sounds much worse. You crazy. And we got into big fights. But years later, he sent me a letter, and he said, you know what? You were right. You were right. It doesn't sound as good. I finally got a good turntable, right. So now I know. So what is it that sounds better? I'm not even sure. On some levels, I can tell you. But on other levels, it's just a thing where you hear it. It's like a woman came down to visit me. She came to my wife's dog show meeting. My wife's into dogs like I'm into hi-fi. And she loves music, and she came down into my room. She'd never heard a really good stereo. And she sat down. I said, what do you want to hear? She says, I want to hear Fleetwood Mac Rumors. So I streamed the 192 24-bit, I think it was a Cobuzz file, on my system. And, she just had never heard a really good system, and she was like, oh, my God, it's amazing. I said, now I just want to play the record of that. So I played her the record. And she went, that's better. That's better. I said, well, why is it better to you? She goes, and she didn't have the words. She said, I'll give you an analogy. So I'm a Coca-Cola fanatic. The streaming was like a bottle of Coke, whereas the record was like you go to the soda fountain and they pour the Coke syrup into the glass with the carbonated water and they stir it. That's a Coca-Cola. And the record sounded like that. Okay. 1 second. Hello? Yes, I'm ready for you. I'm ready for you. Okay, and I'm going to back my car out so you can get to it. Okay, bye. I have my amplifiers are going back to Switzerland for an update. So I've got to go outside right now because FedEx is here. So can you wait 2 minutes?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead. Today's episode is brought to you by Musical Surroundings. For over 30 years, Musical Surroundings has distributed high-performance analog playback equipment to vinyl enthusiasts and music lovers throughout the United States. Based in Oakland, California, Musical Surroundings represents world-class brands like Clear Audio, Hanna, DS Audio, and their own line of Musical Surroundings phono preamplifiers. To learn more about the exceptional turntables, cartridges, and analog accessories they offer, visit musicalsurroundings.com. That's musicalsurroundings.com. Today's episode is brought to you by WellPleasedAV. Importer Mark Sosa has hand-selected a remarkable collection of high-performance brands like Inuos, QLN, Marison, Qualiton, Gigawatt, and more. Each of these specialist manufacturers are driven by engineering products that communicate the lifeblood of music. Check out everything WellPleasedAV has to offer by visiting www.wellpleasedav.com. That's www.wellpleasedav.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by one of the originals in high-end audio, Purist Audio Designs. Purist Audio Design made the first fluid-shielded audio cable over 35 years ago and still makes them today right here in the US. For over 35 years, Purist Audio has connected you to the music. They passionately make high-end, high-crafted audio cables designed specifically to the needs of your system. They list their specs, such as resistance and shield quality, and you can find them at PURISTAUDIODESING.com. Purist Audio Designed is veteran-owned and available worldwide. Today's episode is also sponsored by SCHIIT Audio. SCHIIT Audio designs and builds audio components in California and Texas. Based in Valencia and Corpus Christi, their wide line of amps, DACs, and audio accessories fit any budget, starting at $49. For a full rundown of all their products, visit SCHIIT.com or stop by their retail store in Old Newhall, just north of Los Angeles. That's SCHIIT.com.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So I had to take a break because FedEx came to pick up my amplifiers that are going back to Switzerland to be updated to the latest version. And the guy that came has watched my videos, the FedEx guy. He knew who I was. It was funny.
Yeah, I actually saw a really sweet story with Jason who had like a picture of himself with his FedEx guy. And he was saying, This guy has helped me bring so many heavy speakers into the house over the years. And I was just surprised because I live in Los Angeles. I've never met my FedEx guy. They throw the boxes into the front yard, basically.
Right.
And he has this guy relationship with his FedEx guy because obviously that's a big help to get that stuff in there. So I've seen your YouTube videos too. I actually bought that Tom Petty Wildflowers.
Wildflowers.
Like this, the Wildflowers reissue. Because I just feel like that's like one of the greatest road trip sounding albums ever, a part of my youth at least. So we were talking about vinyl, and you're making a comparison with Coca-Cola in the can versus like really mixed right in front of you.
That's what the woman did. The woman made that comparison, not me. But there's something about it. I can't explain to you what it is exactly. First of all, usually if you compare an original pressing versus any digital version of it, the original pressing will sound better, even if it's got flaws, if it's got like a pops and a clicks occasionally. It draws you in a way. There's like a magic secret sauce. I don't know what it is, but even if it's a digital file, if it starts out as a digital file, why would I buy the record? But the record can actually sound better. And then people say, well, that's a distortion. I don't want distortion. All recordings are distortions. All recordings are plugins and effects and equalization and compression and whatever else they do to it. So if the final step in making a recording, which is a fake thing, the final step is to cut a lacquer of it, turn it into a record, and somehow that sounds better to your ears or relaxes you or puts you in a better state, so what? That's what it does. Who cares if it's not as accurate as the file that started with? What's the file accurate to? To the real music? Not really. It's as good as it can be. There are great digital files. Don't get me wrong. I stream a lot of music and it sounds really good. But for some reason, when I come down here, I've got 8,000 files on a NAS drive, a solid state drive. I've got all the latest and the greatest, Rune and Ordervana and all that stuff. And it's a big improvement. If that had been CDs when digital started, I wouldn't have been screaming like I screamed back then. But still, when I play the record version of a digitally recorded thing, if it's well done, if it's cut by Bernie Grumman or Chris Bellman or Ryan Smith, it can have a certain quality that sounds to me better than the file that started with, for whatever reason.
So you mentioned, I think you barely touched on the idea of the absolute sound. Where do you kind of land? I know Harry Pearson had his ideas on what the absolute sound is and the idea of it. Is it even possible if every listener only elevates their preferences over measurements, design, or their actual experience? Where do you fall on that kind of whole idea?
I always thought the name, the absolute sound, and his idea of sounding like real music in a real space, that's marketing hype like living stereo or living presence. It's just an idea. that you gravitate towards, and it's a marketing thing. No recorded music sounds like, you know live music as soon as you hear it, and you know it's not recorded. There was an event in the Munich show where Jerome Saba, who's a really good saxophone player, played live in the room, in the Dart Zeal and Stenheim speaker room. He played live to a backing track of his group. And it worked pretty well. I mean, it really created the illusion that they were all there, except he sounded much better. He really, because he was there. He was playing live. So no recording, but a good system properly set up, when you turn the lights out, your brain can fill in the blanks and make you think you're there. It can do it, especially live recordings. You play Belafonte at Carnegie Hall on a good system, and you could be in Carnegie Hall. You could be in that space and make the event come live again.
So one of the things that I have been chasing on this show for a while in regards to analog and the turntable sound is that I think that a lot of people acknowledge that it can be different. It can be worse, it can be better, but a lot of people who love the sound. The one thing I'm always interested in chasing is why. And we had a mastering engineer who helps write for the occasional podcast.
Dave McNair. Dave McNair
on, right?
Great piece.
So he emphasized that there is this attention to detail. And he went into the specifics where I was kind of wowed by the amount of delicatness it takes to get the recording right as the groove gets smaller, right?
Yep.
And then as it gets near the middle, you have to be very attentive to the treble and to make sure things don't get hinky and all of this. And I think part of the answer that I found to the why it might sound different is that across all of the path that it takes, attention to detail is needed. And as an offshoot of that, the attention to detail makes for better sound. We talk about it going to the record, being mastered differently for the record. People have to listen to it more instead of just pushing it straight out to digital. Then when it gets to the record player, I think this is one of the things that I've discovered is that a turntable, a very cheap, not well set up turntable can degrade the sound. But if you set it up right, if you set it up with not too many weak links in the chain, you start to get something that's better and better and better. And again, it's that attention to detail from beginning to end that makes the sound better. Now, whatever that sounds to you is up to your perception. But right. I think that attention to detail is the key to unlocking the why.
Yeah, well, there's also something about the process that I can't explain. But I know that if I sit down and listen to a record, it makes me pay attention to it. Whereas a digital file, after a few minutes, I can do something else. I don't know what that is. It's like tubes versus transistors. Tubes, they have higher distortion than solid state, but there's a sound to them that people really love. And that's all that matters, because none of it's real. It's all an artificial construct. And whichever artificial construct better pleases your ears. You go to a hi-fi show, every room sounds different. Every speaker sounds different. And you walk into a room and say, I would not want that speaker in my house no matter what. And then other people love that speaker. So that's one of the great things about hi-fi. It's you make the music the way you want it to sound in your space. And when you set up a turntable, for God's sakes, there's all kinds of different cartridges. You can get a cartridge that's bright, detailed, smooth, warm, and set it up and make it the way you want it to sound. And I think that's good. It's not that one's more the thing about accuracy is such a lot of nonsense. I want my system to be accurate. Accurate to what? To the mastering engineer's speakers? So that's great. So it sounds accurate to that guy's speakers. What does it have to do with your system? Nothing. So accuracy is just a hype. That doesn't mean you want a lot of distortion or you want a speaker that's got lumps and bumps in the frequency response, but it's more than flat on-axis response that matters. There's a whole bunch of factors that matter to what your ear finally hears from a loudspeaker. And so accuracy is really it's something that is used by people in a way that's not useful as far as I'm concerned.
So there's a very few people who have probably had as much experience listening to a volume of turntables like you have.
That's true.
Over the course of your career, what have you learned about having access to so many different turntables? What has that showed you? Not specific turntables, but what has the volume of experience shown you about turntables?
That when people say, well, I wouldn't want a really good turntable because then you hear every little pop and click and noise. I wouldn't want that. But that's the opposite of what a good turntable does. A good turntable, because what is happening in the groove, it's an impulse. It's a velocity sensor. That's what's happening. It's sensing the velocity of the stylus, and it's creating this vibration. And the vibration is turning into electricity, and that's what ends up out of the loudspeaker. And so the better your turntable, the more it is able to suppress the unwanted sounds. So a pop or a click on a bad turntable is going to blow up in your face. You're going to hear that really, really loudly because the turntable doesn't have the ability to damp it out. A great turntable will turn that pop into a barely audible, tiny little tick, and then it will let through all of the musical vibrations that you're trying to, all the energy that's you want to come through. It will let it through the system. And so a great turntable will produce an enormous, great sound and suppress what you don't want to hear. And a not great turntable, even an expensive one, will sound dead. It'll be overdamped. It will be beyond critical damping and be overdamped. And the idea is in the designer to come up with a turntable that lets the energy through that you want to go through and suppress the energy you don't want to come through. And so a great turntable will be explosive and alive without sounding like the stylus is running through a cavern and sending echoes all over the place. And a mediocre turntable will either be overdamped and sound dead, or it'll be the opposite. It'll just be out of control and let all the energy in the room get into the system, get through the feet of this plinth, get into the plinth, vibrate the arm, vibrate everything, and just create a sonic mess. So it's an art and a science, and the great turntable designers understand that you cannot design a turntable simply by measuring numbers. You have to understand the mechanics of it, and you have to listen to how much damping you're putting into it, however you're designing it. So the great turntables make you want to listen more, and usually when people hear a great turntable, they know it. They hear it.
I had a chance to interview a couple of men who did a documentary on collecting records. And I asked them what was the biggest surprise in doing this documentary. And they told me that they found that the majority of the people they interviewed who were new to listening to vinyl and buying turntables were young girls who had found this on Instagram and they saw it and they were seeking this type of visual, tactile experience. And there was a lot of them. There was mass to this, and hence sales of Crosley and these type of all-in-one suitcase systems. What do you kind of make of all that, and how do you feel like it affects the landscape overall for turntable audience?
Well, you got to start someplace in this. And when it comes to young girls and young women getting into it, a lot of it is social. They like to get together, and they bring their records, and they sit around, and they play their records, and they look at the jackets, and they listen to the music, and they talk about it, and there's a picture of the artist. And you can't get that experience from streaming. It's a different thing. And so record parties are a teenage. So look, when I was a teenager, we would have record parties because that's all you could have. So we'd bring our records over to someone's house, 45s, and we'd sit there and we'd play them, and we'd look at the pictures because at that point in time, there was no internet. There was no way to see pictures of anything. Maybe on television, and they didn't have too much rock and roll music on television in those days. When they did, it was an event. But so you would have your jacket, and you would show the covers, and that's what we would do, and they're still doing that. And it's a great experience. I have friends who are like in their 40s, so I'm as old as their parents, but we're friends, we're peers, which is another great thing. I can tell you that's one of the great things about this is the young people that are into this. And I go to their places, and their rooms, their apartments look like my apartment looked in the 70s. There's a wall of records, there's a turntable, there's an amplifier, and there's some big speakers, maybe the big clip speakers or whatever, and a tube amplifier, and they're playing records. There's no television in the room. And then we sit around and we play records and smoke legal weed, that didn't happen when I was a kid. It wasn't legal. And talk about the music and hold up records. And, hey, did you hear this? It's the greatest. And I always said, when records were going away, I said, if kids can hear this and have this experience, they'll want it. Why wouldn't they want it? It's a great thing. And it is of itself. It is a thing. And streaming is another thing. But this thing is a great thing. And these young people also love the sound. They collect jazz records, the records that they like. You can stream them all day for almost nothing. But they'll pay $40 for a Tone Poet record. And they love the pictures, they love the jacket, and they put that on their turntable, and they love the sound. The young girls that are into it, if they like it enough, they'll get a better turntable. They'll move up the line, and I think that's happening. There was a study done that they gave us at the Making Vinyl event in Nashville last week about what's driving sales. And the number one thing they mentioned was sound quality. That sound quality and the vinyl experience. Not that they're buying it to hang it on the wall, not that it's a fad that's going to go away, but it was sound quality. The bullet points were exactly what I suspected without having done the research myself. And it's not because they're buying them to hang things on the wall. No, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I was surprised because we took a trip down to the legendary Amoeba Music here in Los Angeles. They've recently switched buildings, but we went to see the new building, and I was there with my wife, and we were standing there, and we were looking through all the records, and I'm standing by the Taylor Swift had come out with this new album. It was a little more folky. It was called Folklore.
Right.
And I'm standing there, and the new album is there, and I see a young girl, and I'm thinking about this story as I'm standing there, and I see a young girl pull a record of the Folklore and walk out to the aisle. And I was like, that's pretty crazy, because, it's all these records. I'm like, this is echoing exactly what I've heard. And then I look, and I see that there's a line of girls holding the same record, and I look down, and I realized where there's like this pretty good inventory, 5, 6 for all the records, there's a crate of Taylor Swift there. And as I'm looking, I can see like 20 individuals buying this one record on this day, and it wasn't even that close to launch day. So, it's just like the volume of it, I think, speaks a lot to what's really kind of going on. And
yeah, and they like the fact that they're on the line. They all have that record. Mm-hmm. They're part of the same group. It's a group experience where, we are basically like social animals. And so to be able to stand there on the line and say, oh, I got that too. We all have Taylor's record. That's something you get with vinyl you don't get with streaming. Yeah, and when I knew this was happening? When I walked into Princeton Record Exchange in the early 2000s, and Sufjan Stevens had just come out with, I think it was Illinois. His
great record.
Illinois. Great record. And I've got the copy where they had to put the balloon sticker over Superman. So it was an early copy. And there were these college kids. They picked up the record and they were looking at it. And I walked over to them and I said, that record sounds a lot better than the CD. And one of them turned and said, we know that. And that's what I knew, that I was behind the times of what was happening.
Yeah. On the subject of audio reviews, what do you think is the most important thing that can come out of an audio review article?
Okay, so if you read an audio review, let's say you reviewed a review of a preamplifier, and you finish the review, and you don't know how many inputs it has, and how many outputs it has, and whether the single-ended are balanced, and you don't know the size of the thing, and how and you don't know whether it has a mono stereo switch. If you don't know about that stuff, it's a stupid review. And I'm amazed at how many reviews I read of a piece of equipment that doesn't even tell you that. So that's the first thing. Know what the product is. I don't want 10 minutes about your poetry. I don't want 10 minutes about your art. I don't want 10 minutes about your musings of philosophy. I want 10 minutes, and I mean reading 10 minutes, about the product. And I don't mind if a reviewer has a couple of sentences about themselves at the beginning, but when I get to the 8th paragraph down and it starts with what I did was and that's the amateur young reviewers that I see on these websites where and in magazines too, actually. And what I did was I was saying to myself, I should put this thing on, and I don't care about you. When you write that way, the first thing you should do is go back and start over again and get all the I's out of there, except maybe a personal observation at the beginning is fine. But even then, I try to avoid that. Talk about the product. Get right into it. I don't want to feel like I'm walking up a hill in hot weather. And that's what a lot of these reviews are like, because it's just like, shut up. Tell me about the product. I want to know about the product. And then if you want to add something about, well, I've reviewed 8 different phono preamps at this point in time, and this one is this way. And I want to know how it sounds. I don't want to know it sounds great. I don't want to read a review that says, this is the greatest phono preamp I have ever heard. I have never. This is going to change the landscape of the industry. You have no idea. Well, why is that? I don't know, but that's, when I started writing for Harry Pearson at the Absolute Sound, and I was the music editor, the pop music editor, and I said, I want to review equipment. He said, okay, I'll send you a pair of speakers. I want you to write a review. And that review went back and forth because there was no internet at that point in time. There was no even emails. It had to be mailed back and forth. It took me a year to get the review to where he felt it was publishable. A year. I mean, he didn't immediately put everything he was doing down to read my review, but over time, it took about a year. And I learned through that process what I did wrong and what I did right. And I still didn't write great reviews. It took me a while to start writing really good reviews, I thought. But he stopped me from writing really crappy ones. And now there's nobody to stop anybody from posting any kind of crap they want.
That is so true. I think that's true for all content that's been created. There's really good people out there, but they're never before. TV, especially video content, we're just seeing this.
Yes. Anybody can hold up records and start reviewing records or telling you how they sound based on what's their history. What were they doing 10 years ago? Were they selling plumbing supplies 10 years ago? Now they got into the vinyl thing. What were they doing 20 years ago? My first video on the TrackingAngle YouTube channel, which is up now. There are 2 videos on there now. The first one was about anybody can do this. So before you start taking the advice of anybody, you ought to find out who they are, what they were doing 10 years ago, what they were doing 20 years ago, 30. In my case, I could tell you what I was doing 50 years ago. I was writing for the Boston Phoenix. I wrote a piece on records. 50 years ago, I wrote overlooked treasures you should know about. And among the records in there were Ogden's Nut Gone Flake by Small Faces. I don't know if you know that record. Big Star. Big Star was a flop when it came out. And so, like a year after number 1 record flopped, I wrote about it. I wrote about it in the Boston Phoenix. And I look at the 10 records that I wrote about. They're all great records to this day. And records people should know about. And I reviewed them on the YouTube channel, and I held them up. And I said, so when you watch my videos, I'm a guy that's been around. I've done this for a long time. I know how to pronounce Sibelius and Scheherazade. There's the guys out there. This Scheherazade record, it's really good. It's a reissue that just came out. I'm going to compare Scheherazade on this pressing versus Scheherazade on that pressing. And here's a reissue of Sibelius, and Sibelius Finlandia. His cheese is very good, and Sibelius, it's like you look at this stuff and you go, and you're paying attention to these people?
What is your single best turntable tip for getting the best sound out of it?
Single best turntable tip. Make sure your turntable is level. It's a big thing. Make sure it's level. And then set your overhang and your zenith angle correctly. Get a good protractor. Do it right. Set the tracking force carefully. If you can get all those parameters done correctly. Don't mess with them. And if you do that, you shouldn't hear. I digitize my vinyl and put it. I have a Astle and Kern player, and I digitized a lot of vinyl and put them on the Astle and Kern player. And I'm thinking, when I get on an airplane, stick my earbuds in my ear and listen to vinyl on the Astle and Kern player. When that thing's in my ear, I'm going to hear all the surface noise. I'm going to hear the pops and the clicks. I'm going to hear the stylus going through the groove. But I don't. It sounds incredible. And so when there are people sitting next to me and they look at the player, they've never seen it, they only know music coming out of their phone, and they look at it and they go, "Wow, what's that?" I said, "Here, I'll play you something." And they go, "Oh my God, that sounds great." I said, "That's a vinyl record transcribed to digital." What? If you do it right, you should not hear the mechanical artifacts of vinyl playback. You should not. And a great turntable and a properly set up cartridge will give you that.
You said you used to do some stand-up. I just thought we might want to exit with your favorite joke, or it doesn't have to be of your material.
Okay, a new joke. This is a joke that I started telling when I went to England to go to the SME factory and see the new SME Model 60, which that was in March, and I'm supposed to be getting that back. That turntable here to review. The first thing I'm going to review for the Absolute Sound is going to be the SME Model 60. So I got back home and I got COVID, and I started telling people I got COVID. I got the worst variant of COVID. It's COVID MQA. You get COVID and it unpacks diphtheria and Peyronie's disease in your body. And that's a joke. It's a great joke. It's an audiophile joke. If you're not an audiophile, you go, I don't know what MQA is, and it's not funny. But if you're an audiophile and you know what MQA is, and you say it unpacked these two other diseases in your body, it's hilarious. It's a hilarious joke. And then you add Peyronie's disease, and you get a penis joke in there, for free. So,
Michael, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. And don't forget to check out all his new stuff.
TrackingAngle.com, which is right now it's a landing page where you can sign up. Please sign up. And the Tracking Angle YouTube channel, which has 2 videos so far, and it's going to have more. I've got great videos to post there coming up. And when I left my previous endeavor, I had 52,000 subscribers, whereas the previous endeavor's YouTube channel had 33,000 subscribers. I was one guy, essentially, with 52,000 subscribers. I now have 362 subscribers. That's all. I'm okay with that because I'm going to build it back up. I'm patient, and I think once the people that subscribed... Do you know that the FedEx guy that came here to pick up my amplifiers knew... We started talking, and I told him there were amplifiers in this crate. He says, "Oh, I'm into audio." I said, "Come here, I'll show you something." So he walked in the room, and he said, "I know this room. I've seen your you look familiar. I've seen your videos. I know you." That was so great. So anyway, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, and subscribe to my website. I would appreciate it.
You're welcome. Michael, thanks again, brother.
Thank you.
The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes PartTimeAudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA Newsletter, and AudioHead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter, executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.